Hey everybody, just wanted to go through and just do a regular slide deck so you had an example of what one of those could look like. And then I will go ahead and post the activity and fix the links on the readings for the poetry. Somebody let me know that one of those is broken. So a lot of this will be reflective of the Peachy Kucha talk on poetry as well, but you can follow along if you want. So our first question really is, let me actually hide this here and go full screen. Before I do that. All right, sorry for the delay there. So what are we thinking about when we teach poetry? Well, really, when I think about why people teach poetry, I want to get at it's the emotion, in a sense, that we are trying to capture. Um, and really, that's what poetry captures. And it's raw emotion. And it just doesn't, I mean, but it can be about explaining the simple things in life. Some of my favorite poets are the ones that can really look at the most normal day occurrences and capture a little piece of humanity by describing that. But at the same time, poetry can also be as a tool to reflect on pain and reflect on change. I don't think it's a mistake that, there's the poets and poetry history is filled sometimes with troubled pasts or people or written by those considered others by those with more power. So poetry in a way has always been a way to speak to power, but it's been really it's kind of the very first form of literature when you think about it, and especially children's literature. So in this lesson, um, we're really looking at this idea that poetry involves both the ideas and emotion. We're going to look at different types and forms of poetry, and then I'm going to leave you some ideas on how you can teach poetry with technology. I think I actually demonstrated that already with the Peach of Flicker one. And I will leave you a task with to read, write, and respond to poetry. What I will do is also let you know when you should pause this show, and there will be times to interact and write poems during the time. So I talked about this, that I love this quote: painting is silent poetry, and poetry is painting that speaks. In essence, that's what you do with poetry. Your paintbrush are your words. And you have such a palette of human emotions that you can just spread all over the place. And, sometimes you might be painting with a wide stroke, and other times you're sitting there going in with fine details. But the purpose is that you're connecting through these lines and painting a picture, and you're painting pictures with words. So where do these poems come from? Really, it boils down to two things: ideas and emotion. And usually when you're writing poetry, well, at least this is my style. I hate to say that there's a way to write poems. It's just, but when I do it, I'm always thinking about what is the emotion I'm trying to get across, what's the idea that I'm trying to get across. So let's take a quick second and why don't you pause and write down on the Google Doc embedded under this what are some of the emotions and ideas shown in poetry? Do you think there's any emotions or ideas that make for bad poetry? Why don't you pause for about a minute or two and write a few words to that? All right, so hopefully we are back now, and let's think about it. So what does it mean to define poetry in essence? Well, really we're asking, what does a poem need to look like, and what does it contain? And when you think about it, what about this by Allen Ginsberg? Is this a poem? What about this? Do you think this would count? How about this? What about this Ani DeFranco song? In essence, they're all poems because you're looking at a couple things. You want a subject, you want a goal, you want tone, you want flow. And if you can do that, if you can take and just have that concrete subject, know where you want to move that subject through your words, and be able to draw those words on a pathway using different kinds of emotions, and you push the reader in a direction or you push the listener in a direction through your flow, well, then you nail it. And it's always like condensed word choices. Like, again, some of these rules are broken. A lot of people write poetic prose. But there's often ideas of literary devices that use like similes and metaphors and imagery, and we'll talk about that. So why don't we have you folks write a poem? On the next slide, I'm going to show you a few pictures, and then you can pause the video and then write a poem. Post it either to your blog, the class stream, or to the embedded Google Doc below this talk. Write a poem. Pick one of these pictures and write a poem. So, kinds of poetry. Really, when we talk about poetry, and we talk about kinds, now we're getting into the study of poetry, not so much writing, but you know, you can't become a writer without reading a lot of poetry. It's writing is just copying and pasting itself. It's the act of remix. And when we look at it, poems group into, like, we can talk about the formats or what we call forms, and really they're themes or functions. And there's tons of different forms, many of them that you've heard about. For example, you know, here's just a couple. But the idea that these are just different genres of poetry in essence that follow a very specific text structure. And as readers and as teachers and readers, we need to be able to analyze and recognize patterns in text structure. And poetry is about finding patterns, in essence, and playing with patterns. And there's lots of, you know, there's many different kinds of forms of poems. You know, you could have haikus, you could have limericks, but there's many different options. Then, you know, your poems are kind of grouped more by their function or what they're trying to do. This idea of narrative poems where you're telling stories. You know, you think about like a cowboy song or something. An ode, which is celebrating something, you can do that. You can do extended metaphor poems, which I absolutely love to do. And then there's, you know, there's all kinds of poems where you're talking about, you know, common metaphors like traveling on a road. And what we know is that these poems are usually grouped by lines. And this is where, often in poetry, I find more meaning in the spaces between words than in the words themselves. And you get to play and with those spaces. And now, what I'm finding myself, and what I really want to start doing more and more of, is finding ways to play with the way of layering images and words, not just horizontally in a left-right reading pattern, but stacking them using computer code and HTML and stuff. But I don't know how to do that yet. But what you need to do is be able to manipulate lines as a poet. And how do we, though, teach it? And what's it mean? Well, this is an activity that I do often, and it comes down to sensory writing, where I capture tone and mood. And I swear I use this lesson from kindergarten all the way to my graduate students. When I myself get stuck in a poem, I always return to this. And it's basically what I want you to do is describe this picture, but describe it with your senses. Tell me what you hear, what you feel, what you taste, what you see. But give it to me with a happy tone or in a mood. Use words that carry a tone that describe a very happy mood. But use your senses. Ready? Go. Pause the video. Write a poem. All right. Well, I look forward to reading your poems. So what I'm going to do now, and these are short. I mean, these are just kind of one-off updates. I don't think that you have to spend lots of time on this. This is just a, when you're talking about and you're learning about poetry, you really need to read it, listen to it, hear it, and write it. And that's what we're doing often a lot in this talk. We're not doing too much listening of the poetry. I'll have to make sure to post some SoundCloud clips of some favorite poems. But now what I want you to do is take the same picture and use the tone to capture a foreboding mood. Can you do that? All right, so let's pause and wait for a little bit. Give me a foreboding mood. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on and talk a little bit about figurative language. Now, there's a lot of key vocabulary you need to know. If these, oops, and a spelling mistake. A couple of them, actually. But, if these don't look familiar to you, you're going to need to know them. Simile, metaphor, personification. All of these are key guides. And, I'm not going to go over it, but when you think about hyperbole, that's like gross exaggerations. Assonance is, repetitive vowel sounds. Consonants, you have repetitive, starting sounds, or consonant sounds. Sorry, starting sounds would be alliteration, silly me. But those are things like repetition. I love repeating lines. And this is, you have to use these. This is what you find in your toolkit as a poet. And what we used to do to teach poetry is we would have you search for these literary devices and you'd write some kind of book where you have to, the assignment went, all right, find a simile, give me a poem. Oops, sorry. Find a simile, give me a poem that uses similes. Now find a metaphor in a poem. And you're going to draw an illustration. You need to write a book and then you have this like big book of all these figurative devices. And you know what? That is lame. What you need to do is you need to understand why is the poet making those textual choices? And you have to really dissect that poem and understand where they're trying to take you. And then connect it to your own life and decide where it takes you. You don't have to let the poet dictate where you go. You don't have to let the text dominate. The idea that you separate a text from your own experience to me is just, it's just impossible. And there's other ways you can remix and play with texts. So let's check this one out. Here's one we did.
I ask them to take a poem and hold it up to the light like a color slide, or press an ear against its hive. I say, drop a mouse into a poem and watch him probe his way out, or walk inside the poem's room and feel the walls for a light switch. I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving at the author's name on the shore. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with rope and torture a confession out of it.
You want me to pound the erasers?
They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means.
And that was a project we presented back in NCT, gosh, forever ago. And it was my first real idea of let's remix poems. So what I did is I found an audio clip of Garrison Keillor reading a famous poem, Drop a Mouse in Poetry. And the poem is this idea that we don't want to beat the meaning out of poems, but maybe what we can do is play with it. And we can use images as a form of response to poetry. So what I did is I just basically ripped the audio and found a bunch of slideshows, and it's just a slideshow that I put together in iMovie, I think, at the time. So really, when you're teaching poetry, what you need to do is not so much hunt for figurative language, but for what it means to be human. You have to delve into the human experience. And as you do that, examine authors' crafts. That's where you're looking at mentor texts and other poets. It's essential to do that. And it's essential to just really create this environment of writers in your classroom. That's really what we have to strive to do. And there's ways to express that now through multimodal poetry that's a little bit different. So let's look at an example of, this is another one that my pre-service teachers did. And in this project, first they had to take I forget the poet we were studying at the time. A social justice poet, it might have been Merwin, and they had to write a kind of a paragraph of a social issue, and then identify words in that social issue that sparked human emotion. Then take those words and convert them into a poem. Then take that poem, turn it into a multi-verse poem and a multimodal poem. It was an awesome project to really take a social issue and turn it into poetry. So let's check this one out.
3.5 million people.
This guy slept on my stoop last night.
The population of the state of Oregon.
I wish I could just get a few more hours of sleep.
Probably some crazy Vietnam vet.
I have a PhD in computer science. I have a family.
There are as many reasons for homelessness as there are homeless people.
Probably got drunk and passed out there.
3.5 million reasons.
Smells like you peed there first.
Mental illness, physical disability, abusive homes, unemployment, economic downturn.
I need to get my kids to school. The cops should really do something about this.
My poor kids, they don't deserve this.
1.35 million children will face homelessness this year.
You should get a job.
I used to own a business before this economy went to shit.
Disgusting.
I didn't choose this. I would never choose this.
Another thing you could do is connect to actual history. So this is, we were studying the Korean War, and we were talking about Natasha Trethewey one year and doing what we call document poetry. And so here's one from the Korean War.
Full-scale offensive. Not half-scale. Not even 3/4. No quarter. That's what it is. More than just a skirmish. The 7th Fleet. Fleet of sail, churning down the strait, straight towards what? Commitment? Oh, yes, and more. Committed to hold that sacred line, the 38th, where the 3rd phase froze my blood and the 5th phase froze the war. Stalemate. A battle fought not against the PVA, the KPA, but time itself, the enemy of all men. So many hours into days, days into years. Chinese New Year, Chinese Spring. Old Baldy's white pate dyed red. Stalin's flag for all to see. 53 at the 38th. The brass gleams in my hand. The last one. The last one. Shining like the noonday sun. I breathe air unclouded by gun smoke, and I begin to cry.
Chapter 1. By his stripes we are healed. Isaiah.
So think about that poem, and you really could use that in a social studies classroom to capture content knowledge. That demonstrated pure understanding of the Korean War, better than any paper could. So here's your task that you're going to complete for this module. And I will give you all the details. But you're going to read a poem called Identity by Julio Polanco. And you're going to circle words that show a sense of identity. You're going to complete a graphic organizer that tries to get at them. It's an extended metaphor poem. And then you're going to write an extended metaphor poem comparing yourself to something. And I will be doing this along with you and making a fool of myself as I go. But that will be our activity, and I will post it all to the website, and you can watch as we get that started. So that's it, everybody. Thanks. Bye.